All right, welcome to our webinar today. We are so excited to have Rotem Brayer with us, and he has a master's in education and is a licensed professional counselor specializing in trauma therapy. With a passion for healing and an extensive background in counseling, Rotem has established himself as a leading expert in the field of eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, EMDR therapy. Rotem is the co-founder of the the founder of the EMDR Learning Community, a place for EMDR therapists to connect and grow together while gaining valuable education on EMDR therapy and its integration with other treatment approaches. He is also the co-founder of EMDR Denver, consulting on complex cases, coaching fellow EMDR therapists, and working directly with clients on their healing journey. Rotem is a certified EMDR consultant and an advanced EMDR trainer, as well as an accomplished author. His 2023 publication titled The Art and Science of EMDR, Helping Clinicians Bridge the Path from Protocol to Practice, serves as a valuable resource for clinicians seeking to deepen their understanding of EMDR and refine their therapeutic techniques. Through his various endeavors, Rotem Brayer continues to make a profound impact in the world of counseling, empowering both therapists and clients to embark on a journey of healing, growth, and resilience. And we are so grateful to have him here with us today.
Thank you, Alexa. So I am going to share my screen and start talking about one of my favorite things to talk about, mindfulness. I think that it's a little challenging to talk about everything I want to talk about in 30 minutes, but so I'll try to go through it and then leave time for Q&A. So let's get right to it. What is mindfulness? I know it's a buzzword. I know a lot of people are kind of using mindfulness a lot. It's in popular media. It's everywhere. When you go to the grocery store and you have these magazines when before the register, there's a lot of magazines with mindfulness. And I think that it's really helpful to understand where it's coming from, a little bit about the origin and the purpose of it. So mindfulness is the English translation of the Pali word sati, S-A-T-I, and that's a word that we found in the English language, but it's not directly being translated. We can't really, we lose something when we translate from other languages. So some scholars have translated mindfulness as awareness or attention, and there's some other words. So we have to remember that that this buzzword has an origin, a very long-term origin. So when we are looking at mindfulness, we have the formal practice of mindfulness is meditation. So meditation is when we're formally practicing, and there are different practices. We can focus on our breath. We can focus on what we call loving kindness, or on an object like a candle. Some people do mantra meditation. There are all kinds of practices, and with different types of practices, we get different results, different outcomes. So I want to just mention a few of these results that people are getting as a result of practicing meditation. So reduce blood pressure, boost recovery after the release of cortisol. So cortisol is a stress hormone that is being secreted to our bloodstream when we're in a stressful situation. So we're recovering faster after release of cortisol. There are really interesting studies about improved immune system functioning. So two groups, one that was involved in meditation practice, one was a control group, and they got a vaccine, and then the researchers measured their the antibodies. So these are hard data. These are hard data evidence that meditation really brings tangible results. It reduces violence in prison. So there's a movement of teaching mindfulness and meditation in prison. It boosts productivity. So we see corporations like Google and many other corporations that incorporate mindfulness meditation into their the workplace because they want to improve results. We see improved behaviors and improved grades for school children. So there are a lot of benefits to meditation. And one way to think about meditation is that if you're doing the right thing, you will get the right results. The same way that if you go to the gym and you are practicing, let's say you're lifting weights, there's certain biochemical processes that happen. You tear the muscle a little bit and then the muscle grows. The same thing happens with meditation. We are able to rewire the brain, but we have to do it in a certain way. And this is what I'm going to talk about today, how we do it. This is really important. So let's talk a little bit about research on mindfulness. Mindfulness research started in the 70s. And as you can see, this chart shows somewhere until maybe 2016. The trend has continued. So there's more and more research. Part of it is the reason that we have the technology now to do that. We have the technology to get hard data, to get into the brain of people who practice meditation and mindfulness and see what their brains look like and how they're different. And there's a before and after. And this is really, really fascinating. There's a lot of problems. There are a lot of problems with research on mindfulness in general. Typically, the researchers use small sample size. Studies don't necessarily get to be repeated, which is a problem in psychology in general, not just in mindfulness. There's a confirmation bias problem. So if the person who designed the study is also the person who analyzes the data, they're likely to consciously or unconsciously skew the results. Publishers don't necessarily publish studies that don't get the results that they wanted. So if they didn't get the results, they just don't publish. And then, the scientific community doesn't necessarily know about it. And up until recently, there was only self-report. There was the hard data I'm talking about that I will keep talking about today was non-existent. But because we have so many advances in technology, we are really able to look into the brains of people who meditate. And I think one more, and there are a lot more issues with research, but one more issue with research is that most researchers don't take into consideration lifetime hours of how much people have meditated, and that seems to be a very important factor. So let's look at mindfulness versus what I called mech mindfulness. So this is what we do in the West. We take everything, we put it in a microwave for 30 seconds, and we're trying to make it fast. And there are advantages and disadvantages to that approach. But we have to remember that this mindfulness, where it came from 2,600 years ago, when there was no functional MRI and all the science that helps us prove and show how it works, that practice had some spiritual aspect to it. And what researchers and meditation teachers have done to make it accessible to people is stripping off that component of spirituality, and they made it just a practice. So, we have all these apps and we have all these devices and we have all these, YouTube videos that we can use, for 3 minutes when we're having lunch to do meditation before. It's not good or bad. And there's pros and cons to both, right? Because it looks like we need mindfulness now more than ever. And that's, I think, part of the reason why it's becoming such a buzzword and why everybody's practicing it. But the original goal was to really deeply explore the mind. And again, the Western approach was to really make it fast and quick. And we're missing something here with the fast and quick. So this is why I called it mindfulness. I wanted to go over very quickly because that on its own can be like several hours of talk about the eightfold path. This is the path that leads to the end of suffering according to Buddhism. And again, mindfulness, meditation, all these traditions came from Buddhism. So the Buddha talked about we all have suffering in the world. We all experience suffering in the world. And if you follow the path, the eightfold path over your lifetime, it's not a quick fix. It's not something you do, for 10 minutes, 3 times a week. It's something that this is how you live your life. When you live your life like that, it leads to the end of suffering. So the eightfold path, I'm just really going to touch on number 1 and 4, which is right view and right action. So when it comes to right view, we need to know, first of all, why we're meditating. A lot of people have this notion of not doing it right when it comes to meditation. I don't know how to meditate. It's not for me. My brain doesn't work like that. I hear it all the time. And we need to understand that we need to develop this objective view to remove the I, the me, the subjective view from the experience. So when people think that meditation is a task that you must be perfect at, they tend to feel certain level of shame and then they don't practice. So I think right view is a good start to talking about it doesn't need to be perfect. And with time, with practice, what we develop is objectivity. So we're able to see reality more as it is, as opposed to our own subjective view of reality. So that was right view. Right action, which I mentioned here, is I hope I'll have time to get to it because this is really important. And part of my goals for today is really for people to take action and to understand what they need to do and to take that action. So I will try to get to it. The brain and mindfulness. So what we know from research is that there are predictable changes in the brain when people follow a certain path. So people need to know that when they meditate on a regular basis over a long period of time, all right? So there's 2 things here, regularly over a long period of time, then they will see the predictable outcomes. What researchers have seen is a reduction in the activity of the default mode network, which is a hub in the brain. Some scientists call it the me network or the I network. That's the part of the brain that is active when we're ruminating, when we're thinking about ourselves, when we're not doing anything in particular. Think about what you do when you're awake at 2 o'clock in the morning. I hope most of you are not, but in case you are, that's what your mind does. The default mode network becomes overactive, and then you start ruminating, and everything becomes, the world kind of narrows down to you and your world. And in most cases, for most people, this is not a positive experience. So the DMN, or the default mode network, is involved in what's called metacognitive processes. So a lot of self-reflection, mental time travel. We're not really able to experience the present moment as it is. We're going back to past experiences, or we're predicting something that will happen in the future. Now, according to Buddhism, the self is a false concept, is a mental construct, but the self doesn't really exist. And I know it might be hard for us in the West to conceptualize the non-existence of the self, because there's so much emphasis on the individual and the self in our culture, but that's the origins. I think it's important. One resource that is really good if you want to understand the science of mindfulness and meditation is this book, Altered Traits by Richard Davidson and Daniel Goleman. And in this book, they are talking about different types of meditators. So they talk about the deep versus the wide. The deep, the people in the deep group are people who dedicate their lives to this practice with an average of 27,000 lifetime hours. And that's why I mentioned that one of the problems in research is that a lot of researchers don't look at lifetime hours of meditation. So in the deep group, you have people with 27,000 hours. And then in the wide group, we have people with less than 100 hours. And that's most people in the West, right? They pop their phone and they open their app, meditation app, and they spend 5 minutes, and then they don't do it for a week or two, and then they do it 3 times a week, but they're not being consistent. And that's part of why people don't see the really significant outcomes of meditation. So again, people in the wide group are most of us, but this is not what this practice originally was meant to give us, the wide group. Again, there's pros and cons because it's more accessible and we need it now more than ever. We have these devices that constantly seek our attention. We get a lot of stimulation from the environment, and we need some kind of practice that will ground us and help us be aware more of the present moment. But we're not going to get the full benefits if we are going to just be in that wide group. So there's also a middle group. And if I had one goal for this presentation is for every person who's watching it to move from the wide group to the middle group. So the middle group is a group of typically Westerners who are very dedicated to their practice. They have somewhere between 1,000 and 10,000 hours of meditation, lifetime meditation practice with an average of 9,000 hours. And again, all this research is being described in Altered Traits, the book that I mentioned by Richard Davidson and Daniel Goleman. And in this group, we really see significant changes. So we start to see altered traits. So there are altered states, which is the result of a little bit of meditation. You feel the effect of it, or maybe you feel the effect of it in the moment. But then when you go back to your life, you don't necessarily feel these effects. In the middle group, people really start to see these altered traits. And the reason why people see these altered traits is that because their brains are changing as a result of the consistent practice of mindfulness. Alexa, are there any questions so far in the chat or anything?
I am not seeing any. So if anybody does have any questions, feel free to stick them in the chat. I actually had a question in that middle group of the average of 9,000 hours. What does that typically look like per day?
Yeah, so these people tend to meditate maybe an hour a day, but they also, and this is really important, the research found that these people tend to go to retreats, meditation retreats. It can be from a weekend retreat of like maybe long weekend, 3 days, to Vipassana retreats of 10 days of silent meditation that typically people wake up in the morning and they meditate, and then they meditate more, and maybe they eat a little and then they meditate more. So they spend a lot of time meditating. And these retreats, for some reason, tend to really be significant in what they do to the brain. So the other piece, Alexa, is that they don't tend to miss that practice. So they don't tend to think like, what I hear from my clients is, I don't have time to meditate. And they don't think about it like that. It's not an option to miss that because you don't have time. So this is the deep group in this picture. Who you see is, I don't know who the person on the left is, but in the center is Mathieu Ricard, who is a French molecular biologist who he did his PhD in molecular biology and then ended up becoming a monk. So he left the academia to become a monk. And he helped the person on the right, who's Richard Davidson, who wrote that book that I showed, Altered Traits. He helped design some of their protocols because he thinks both like a very, very experienced meditation practitioner, but also as a scientist. And again, I think that we will not have time to get into all that research, but the research that they describe in the book is just fascinating. How these people who dedicate their lives to this deep practice, their brains are wired completely different than most of us in the West. Now, to be realistic, we're not going to be there. We have our lives, we have our kids, we have our jobs, we have duties that we have to do. We're not going to be able to meditate, tens of thousands of hours, but we can be. I think that most of us can be in this middle group, and it really leads to significant changes. So a little bit about research, and then I want to go back to action. So what do we do with action? How do we actually implement all that into our lives? So first of all, different results for different practices. So as I mentioned, there's breath meditation, there's mantra meditation, there's loving kindness meditation, and these different practices lead to different activity in different parts of the brain. So they lead to different results. One of the most well-researched meditation programs is called MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, that was developed by Jon Kabat-Zinn. And what we see in not a very long period of time, there was lessened reactivity of the amygdala, which is the threat detector of the brain. So the amygdala is overactive for people with anxiety and post-traumatic stress disorder. And when people did that 8-week program, and again, it's a very intense program. So people have homework every day, and they also have, a full day of kind of like a retreat day. The researchers seen a reduction in the activity of the amygdala. What we see, and this is important, this is why we need to stay consistent, which I'm going to get to in a minute, how we do that, but we have to stay consistent. So you don't see the results after a week, not after 2 weeks, not even after 3 months. Usually, typically, if you are consistent and you meditate daily, you will start seeing the results, what we call altered traits, after somewhere between 6 to 9 months. And there's elevated gamma oscillation. So there's gamma waves, there's different brain waves in different areas of the brain. And these people in the deep group have it's really interesting, because what happens in their brains is not only that specific areas are either underactive or overactive, but the brain as a whole just works more in coherence. So I want to skip now to right action and recommend another book called The Power of Habit. to help tie all that together and give the people who watch this presentation an idea of how to do all that, right? Because we were talking about it's a good idea to meditate, but again, from my experience from many of my clients, they start and they stop, and then they try to start again, then they stop. In The Power of Habit, Charles Duhigg talks about how to either change bad habits or start good habits. And he talks about three components of every habit. One is cue or trigger. He calls it cue, I call it trigger. The routine is the behavior and the reward. And what most people try to do when they're trying to start a new habit is focus on the routine or the behavior and not pay enough attention to the cues or the rewards. And we need to pay attention to those. So the cue or the reward can be the time of the day, for example. If you meditate every day at 6 p.m., that's good, because over time, when 6 p.m. comes, you're not going to have to invest mental effort. It will just happen. You will just do it. I meditate first thing in the morning. When I wake up early before everyone in my family, and then I spend this time to meditate. And if I don't do that, the few days here that I don't do that, it really feels weird when people start talking to me before I spend some time focusing on my breath. The reward is another piece that helps tie together the habit. So initially we can use external rewards. So if you meditate for, let's say you're never meditating and you're just starting, you can give yourself a reward, whatever your reward, ice cream, I don't know, like if I meditate for a whole week, I will give myself guilt-free ice cream or beer or whatever it is. And what happens over time, the reward becomes internal, because when you meditate over an extended period of time, you start feeling the internal reward. So this is pretty much what I have, maybe 5 ways to help people create a meditation habit. So tie the habit to a repeating cue. So again, whether if it's the time of the day, or it can be right before lunch, right after dinner, right before you brush your teeth, something you're already doing every day, do it right before or after, and the brain will kind of chunk it together and make it automatic. Start with a few minutes. When people start doing it for an extended period of time, it's usually they give up quickly. Use apps. So I am not a big fan of being dependent on apps, but apps have this really good way of getting people on streaks. So they have their own reward system to encourage people to continue with that. And then devices. So we have the, TouchPoint. So when I do very short meditation, I use these. I put my touch points in these and put them on my wrists, and that really helps me ground the bilateral stimulation. Maybe we'll do another talk another time about the effects of bilateral stimulation, but that really helps. Slow bilateral stimulation helps to ground and enhance the feeling of calm. And then starting with the right type of meditation. So some people ruminate who having depression or anxiety. Typically, breath meditation is not necessarily good for them. So they can start with a self-compassion meditation, which is a really good way to start. This is a quote from the Dalai Lama about compassion. The first person to benefit from compassion is the one who feels it. So again, when you feel compassion toward other people, it's not for them, it's for you. You really are benefit from it. There are really, really interesting studies with heart rate variability and what compassion does, how it changes patterns of heart rate variability when people practice compassion. And then Finally, just a few resources. So the 2 books that I mentioned, and also the Mindful Self-Compassion Workbook. If you buy that book, the Mindful Self-Compassion Workbook, you will also get a recording. They send you to a website where you can download recording of self-compassion exercises. You can listen to it when you're practicing. I think that's it. That was pretty quick. I think that every slide I can spend a few hours talking about, but this is what I have for today with the limitation of our time.
That is so fascinating. I have pages of notes. And for somebody just getting started, I think that a lot of times when I've talked with people that are trying meditation journeys for the first time, they're feeling like their mind is wandering. So is it okay to kind of let the mind wander, or should you try to keep grounding back to a certain thing, or does that come over time?
Yeah, so this is where I talked about the word for mindfulness is sati, and we translate it as mindfulness, but it's also attention and retention, can be translated as attention and retention. So basically, we can think about it as strengthening these neural network that are noticing that we get lost in thoughts. And when we do that for an extended period of time, what we're able to develop is not only the ability to do it during meditation, but to do it outside of in our life, outside of the meditation, because we all do that, right? We all tend to go on these thoughts, especially when we're doing some mindless activities, like when we're driving, for example. We don't need to, obviously we need to focus on the road, but we tend to think a lot. And we really develop this muscle. It's not really muscle, but it's these neural networks that are able to notice that we do that. So yes, back to your question, we just notice that our thoughts, we're kind of like get lost in thoughts, and then we're bringing back the attention to our breath, for example, or to our mantra, or to that candle that we're focusing on, or whatever else we're doing in our meditation.
Great. And do you know of any apps that are good to start? Not necessarily to keep using long term, but if someone was going to start the practice of mindfulness and meditation?
Yeah, so I personally, I have Calm, and again, I'm usually not using it. I occasionally using it. I don't like when people get dependent on their apps. So I know Headspace is very popular. There is a device called Muse, M-U-S-E, and that's a really interesting device. So that device is a headband that people put around their forehead and behind their ears, and it has sensors that feel brain activity. So when we are starting to wander, there's a sound, it connects to an app, and there's a sound that increases in volume, and that reminds us to go back to the focus of attention, usually the breath. It's really, really effective, because when people start their meditation journey, usually all they do is just like think, have a lot of thoughts, and that really helps remind people to bring them to the zone. Now, when people are in the zone, it uses a reward system. It plays a very gentle bird sound that basically gives a signal to the brain to just stay in that state. This is really interesting. That technology didn't exist even 20 years ago. And now we have that available. It's kind of like a neurofeedback machine. It's not really a neurofeedback machine, but it uses that same concept of neurofeedback, like giving the brain rewards, or reminding us that when we're not in the zone, or when we're kind of drifting away and start to ruminate and start thinking about our lunch or whatever else we have to do on our task list.
I need that for my family members, only with a zapper to bring them back to focus on me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And again, I really like my my little touch points. They're really easy to use, and they're really grounding. I don't use them for my morning meditation, my long meditation, but when I do afternoon, when I spend a few minutes just to ground myself, I typically use them.
Do you think for somebody starting out that touch points can kind of help get into that state a little bit easier to begin with?
Yes, I think so, because again, it has that same bilateral stimulation. And again, that's a whole different talk, what bilateral stimulation does to the brain. That's my area of specialty is EMDR. We're using typically faster bilateral stimulation to activate some and process traumatic memories. What touch points do, they use slow bilateral stimulation, and that helps to calm down the nervous system and to help people feel more grounded and not get lost in thoughts.
That's great. Go ahead, Ashley.
I was just going to say, if anyone didn't have any other questions, I can definitely talk a little bit more about the giveaway with touch points.
Okay.
Did anyone have any other questions in the chat?
There are no questions in the chat.
Okay, awesome. Well, yeah, thank you again, Rotem. We really appreciate your time, and this was really great and educational. As you mentioned, the touch points are a really good tool for utilizing them during meditation or forming good habits even. And we are going to be giving away a set to someone who joined the webinar. That person will be contacted directly, as well as announced in an email that everyone will get. That will also have some materials, and I believe, and then a recording of the webinar if you want to come back and watch. It will also just have a discount code if you want to go and get touch points yourself, if you aren't the person who received it. So yeah.
Great. All right, well, I don't see any other questions. Thank you so much. I have learned a lot. I have a ton of notes and I really enjoyed it. I would actually love for you to do another webinar for us sometime and talk about the EMDR, and that would be fascinating. So
sounds good.
I appreciate it. All right, well, I'm going to stop the recording and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.